morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As you've found out already, we're talking about values again today. And we're in the middle of a series, three-part series on values. Last week, Lani did a great job at introducing the concept of values to us. And next week, Fraser's going to be talking about values in the context of us as a church family, a church community. And today, we're kind of going even closer to home than that, and we're going to be talking about your own personal, individual values. Now, why should we be talking about values? Why are we bothering to have a whole series on this topic? Well, one of the reasons is because whether or not you realize it, our lives and the lives we are living are being shaped by the values that we hold. And so that's the first reason. The second reason is here at Burwood Church, we are beginning a conversation around what are the core values that we want to have, not just as individuals, but as a church community. And because values are so important, because they shape who we are and what we do so much, we don't want to just let our values be something that we just hope happens and hope are in line with God. And we want to be intentional about this. We want to be prayerful about this. And we want to have a conversation around this. And so this is not just a conversation for the leadership, although the leadership will be talking a lot about values here at Burwood Church, but this is a conversation we'd love all of you to be a part of. And so that's why we're really emphasizing the importance of values. Now, about 6 weeks ago, I went on a hiking trip. Now, at the beginning of the year, I told you that one of the things I was looking forward to this year was planning a hiking trip. Well, this was that trip. And so I went down to Tasmania and I did a hike called the Overland Track. Now, there's probably a few people here who've done the Overland Track because it's probably the most famous hiking track in Australia. And when I went down there, it didn't take me very long to realize why this trail is so famous, because the scenery down there in this part of Tasmania is exceptional. There's these rugged, wild mountains, there's these just pristine lakes, and there's these magical forests. And every hour or so on this trail, you turn the corner and suddenly you find yourself in this new world of wilderness wonder. And so I really loved this hiking trip. And it really loved being down there and just immersing myself in God's creation. Now, one of the things I noticed being down there hiking on this trail was that because it's a popular trail, there's quite a few other people that were there at the same time as well. And you're literally sharing the trail with these other people. So there's, maybe 40, 50 people that at the same time are going on literally the exact same trail in the same direction. So you're doing the same thing. But even though we were all doing the same trail, many of us were having quite different experiences. And the reason we were having different experiences was because we were making different choices. And so let me share with you some of the different choices that people were making as they approached this Overland Track. So firstly, was with the people that people were hiking with. So there was some people that when they planned for this trip, they chose to grab a big group of friends and to hike this trail together. So it might have been 6 or 7 people, and that you could see these groups of people. They were laughing and having this wonderful social adventure together on this trail. Then there were other people who they decided to pay to join a professional organized tour. And so you'd see these people walking along in file, maybe a dozen of them, and they're all dressed with the identical outfit, like they had this little uniform on, and they were having a different experience. And then there was a few people who, like myself, decided to do this hike completely by ourselves. And so my experience was quite different to some of these other people. So that's one of the differences. Another difference was one in where people chose to stay each night. So along the trail, there's these, I didn't know that the huts were going to be so fancy, but there were these huts that were like these little architecturally designed luxury lodges out there in the wilderness. And so most people decided to stay in these huts with their space and their heater and all these like fancy glamping facilities. But a few of us decided that instead of that, we wanted to set up in the rain our little cramped hiking tents and be away from all the space and the luxury and the snoring. And so that's created a different experience. Another difference was in planning the trip, people planned for themselves very different schedules. There were some people that were just racing along the trail and completing the whole trail in like 3 days. But then there were other people that chose to do it over like 9 days. And so they would have this nice sleep in the morning, and then they would meander along the trail a little way in the morning. Then they would arrive at their destination by lunchtime and spend the afternoon just sipping tea and reading a book and just having this relaxed time, while others are just desperately trying to get to their destination in time before the sun goes down. And so here's all these people, different experiences, different decisions. And the question is, why were they all making such different choices? Now, of course, there are some limiting factors that influence this, such as how fit people might be or what access they had to resources to take with them and things like that. But if you put those things aside, I think one of the biggest contributors to these decisions were people's individual values. People came to this hike with different priorities. People came to this hike wanting to get different things out of it, and their values, even though this is just a little hike, were literally shaping their experience. Let me give you a couple of examples of the values that were shaping my experience. So one of the values that I came to this hike with was solitude. Now, a few years ago, when I was working at a church in New South Wales, the conference leadership there was encouraging pastors to go on solo trips. And the idea was to get away by yourself somewhere, just you, nature, and God, and just have an experience of disconnecting from the busyness of life so that you can reconnect with God. And so I took up that challenge. I did that a couple of times. And as a result, I came to really value these experiences of solitude, just getting out in nature and being just alone, you and God. And so when I went into this trip, that was one of the things I was wanting to get out of it. So that's why I chose to hike it by myself. And that's why I chose to avoid all the snoring people and stay the night in the tent, because I had different things I was wanting to get out of the hike. Another value that shaped the way that I planned my trip was the value of family. Now, I know I didn't take my family there, but I was very conscious of the fact that my family wasn't there, and for me to be able to be there on that hike, Kylie was at home by herself, taking care of Alora, and so I really didn't want to be away from home longer than I needed to be, and so I literally planned it. So I arrived the night before, and then the next morning I was on the trail, and then when I finished, I was directly to the airport and I came home. And I was one of those people that was trying to squeeze as much into every single day as I can so that I wasn't out there longer than I needed to be. And so the value of family was shaping my decisions. Another decision I made was I was the only person I came across that actually took a satellite phone with me. And so having a satellite phone, each night I would be in my little tent calling home and talking to Kylie and Alora and seeing how they're going and letting them know that I'm still alive. Whereas for others, they had no mobile connection the whole time, and they were just like, I have no idea what's going on at home. And so we were having different experiences because of our different values. And I think the reality is, this is just my experience with hiking, but in every aspect of our lives, every decision that you make is being shaped by your values. And if that's the case, if our values are shaping our decisions and our behaviors and the people that we are becoming and the people we are, then I think it's worth spending some time actually thinking about this and making sure that we are living according to our values and that we're living according to good values. So what exactly is a value? What counts as a value? Well, here's a definition I came across in a book called Change Your World by John Maxwell. He defined values this way. Values are principles that guide your decisions and your behaviors. So, simple definition, they're guiding principles that are influencing those decisions we make and those things that we do. Let me give you some examples. Hard work, that is a value. Fairness, pleasure, humility, power, kindness, these are all examples of values. But I want to just nuance this a little bit in that just because you're doing one of these things doesn't necessarily mean it's one of your values. Let me give you an example. So when I was out there hiking, I came across this other young guy, similar age, who was also there doing the overland track solo. But you know what? I don't think that solitude was one of his values, because he didn't sort of keep to himself a bit when he was out there. He was doing everything he could to insert himself into these other friendship groups, and he literally attached himself. And every time I saw him, he was eating with this group, he was sleeping in the same room in the cabin with this group, he was on the trail with this group. And so even though he was there as a solo hiker, being by himself, I don't think was really his value. And so just because you're working hard doesn't mean that you value hard work. Just because you are helping people, you're in a job that is helping people, for example, doesn't mean you value helping people. Just because you're in a position of power doesn't mean that you value power. Just because you're singing worship praise songs doesn't actually mean that you value praise. For a value to be a value, it needs to be something you value. And so that's what a value is. A value is a deeply held thing that you put a lot of value and worth on that is shaping your decisions and your behaviors. So one of the things that I was thinking about as I was preparing this, I was like, is this really a biblical sermon? Is this really something that the Bible talks about, values? And one of the things I realized as I thought about this was that the Bible actually speaks quite a lot about values. And let me give you a few examples. So if you've got your Bibles there, I would like you to grab those, because we are going to open up to Exodus chapter 34 and verse 6. And if you've got one of the green Bibles, there's a page number up in the corner that you might find helpful as well. So Exodus chapter 34 and verse 6. Now, I've talked about this story a few times here at Burwood Church, but I want to just remind you of the context. So in this story, we have Moses, and he's at Mount Sinai, and he's desperately talking to God about wanting to be reassured that God is going to be with him as he leads this group of grumbling Israelites into the promised land. And in the context of this conversation with God, Moses makes this bold request and says, God, show me your glory. And God says, okay, let's do this. And so Moses is taken up on this mountain and put in this crack in the rock, and God comes to show his full glory and to Moses. But what's amazing is what that glory actually consisted of. And so in Exodus chapter 34 and verse 6, we see this description. It says, and he, this is God, passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. And so here is God, and he's turning up, and he's there to reveal to Moses what does he see most important about himself? What does he see as being most glorious about himself? And what does God talk about? His values. He talks about the values that guide everything that he does, the values that guide his decisions and his actions and the way that he governs the universe. That's what God chose to talk about in this moment. And God says, hey Moses, want to know what's glorious about me? It's my compassion, my graciousness. It's that I'm abounding in love, and that I'm abounding in faithfulness, and that I forgive sin, and that I'm a God of justice. And God is showing that's what matters so much to me about me. It's my values. It's who I am. Let's go to the New Testament. So So go to Matthew chapter 5 now, and let's see what Jesus has to say about values. So Matthew chapter 5, and we'll start in verse 3. So the context here is another mountain. Here Jesus is standing on top of this mountain, and he has this big crowd of people, and this is kind of this moment where Jesus is going to introduce to all these people what his kingdom is all about. And you know what he starts off by talking about? Values. Matthew 5 verse 3 says this. So Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So this is really cool because Jesus is here introducing to these people, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? And you know what was first and foremost on Jesus' mind? It wasn't what people do for Jesus, but it's about who those people are. It's about the values. And I love that because Jesus, he doesn't care first and foremost what we do. He cares about who we are. And if we get that right, if we get our values right, then these other things just naturally flow out of this. When we take the values of God's kingdom and we make them values that we value, then they begin to shape our decisions, and they just shape the person I am today and the person I am becoming, and they shape all these things that we do. So values are important because they shape us. Values are important to God about himself. Values are important to Jesus about the way that we should live our lives and we should follow him. So here's the question I have for you. Do you know what your values are? Do you know what your values are? And notice I didn't say, do you know what your values should be? Two different questions. And I think a lot of us, reading about Jesus and reading about the Bible, we know what our values should be, but do you know what your values are? What are those guiding principles that are shaping and are directing in your life? Well, the next question is, how would we actually go about finding out what our values are? I want to share, I think there's kind of two ways that I thought of. There's the hard way and there's the not so hard way. Let me share with you first the hard way. Now, this was a passage that Lani shared with us last week, and I would describe this as the hard way to find out what your values are. So, Matthew chapter 23 and verse 23. So here we have Jesus talking to these Pharisees who probably thought that they had pretty good values. But this is what Jesus said. He said, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law, you Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will be clean also." So here, these people, Jesus describes them as being blind. In fact, in this chapter, Jesus used the word blind 5 times. So here's a group of people that everyone esteems as people being of great value. And they probably think of themselves as being people who are living out these great values. But Jesus is like, hey, you don't actually realize the values that are directing your life. And so how did they find out about them? They actually had Jesus in this case, point them out. And let me tell you, that can be a pretty uncomfortable, hard thing to have someone point out what the values are in your life. Now, they might be good values, and maybe it's a wonderful, affirming experience. But in this case, I think this is a hard thing for them to experience. So that's the hard way. So what's the less hard way? I think the less hard way is actually to take the initiative and do some reflection yourself. And to actually take some time, prayerfully, maybe it's that in that space of that solitude like I was talking earlier, where you are just take some time to reflect on what are the values that I'm actually living by? What are the things that are actually moving me and shaping my life? And are those the things that I want to be shaping my life? So how do we actually reflect? What do we reflect on to discover our values? Now, I want to give a little bit of credit to the discussion group that I was a part of last week. We really got into this last week, and there were some great ideas that were shared about the things that we can look at and reflect on that can help us to increase our awareness of our own personal values. And here are two things that jumped out to me from that conversation: resources and feelings. When you reflect on the way that you use your resources and you reflect on your feelings, that's a great place to have some self-discovery and reflection. Let me give you some examples. So what resources am I talking about? This is things like your money, your energy, and your time, and how you use these things. Because the way that you spend these resources, is going to say a lot about what you actually value. So let's take time, for example. So each of us has 24 hours in the day. How much of that do you put to your work? How much of that do you invest in your family? How much of that do you spend sleeping or exercising? How much of that do you spend on your phone or on watching TV? And whatever else it might be. Spend some time thinking about how am I actually utilizing the time that I have each day, and what does that teach me about the things that I value? Another example would be money. How does the way that I spend my money reflect what my actual values are? And one example might be, let's say, generosity. Let's say you want to be a person and you think that you value generosity. Well, if you really value generosity, it's probably going to be reflected in your budget. And if it's not, maybe that's saying there's a disconnect between what you want to value and what your life is actually valuing. So that's resources. What about feelings? What are the things in your life, those moments or the things in your life that make you feel alive? What are the things that give you joy? What are the things that energize you? Those things might be your values. I'll give you an example. Just this morning, I'm sure Brad will be happy for me to share this. In our elders group, we've been sharing our own sort of personal stories. And Brad made the comment that when he helps people, he just loves to help people and it gives him so much joy. And you know what that means? If that's the feeling you get from doing that, that's one of your values. And another comment that, I'll point out Lani. She was talking about something that she was doing that she said, I had so much fun doing it. You know what that emotion means? That there's some sort of alignment between what you're doing and with your values. And so the feelings that you have can be a really great indicator of the values that you have. Another example is those more negative values. What things make you feel deflated or lacking in energy or disillusioned or the opposite of those things? Maybe those things are actually, you're feeling those because there's a misalignment in your life between the things that you're doing and the values that you want to be living out. I want to share with you a challenging quote that I came across from that book, Change Your World. And it says this: many years ago, James Dobson analysed the disillusionment many people experience between the ages of 35 and 50. It's often called a midlife crisis. Dobson's observation was that people become disillusioned when they discover they have been living by the wrong value system. He described it this way: all of a sudden you realize the ladder you've been climbing is leaning against the wrong wall. That's a pretty challenging realization to come to, that you've invested all this time and energy in your life, and now you're in this place and you're like, you know what? The place I'm in now, it doesn't really align with my values. And so you end up having these feelings of disillusionment, which are indicators where you can actually reflect on and become more aware of what those actual values are in your life. Another feeling is the feeling of anger. Sometimes anger is a good indication of our values. Now, usually we don't think about anger in terms of positive things, but in this case, anger can be helpful because sometimes the reason we feel anger or frustrated or irritated is because there's some value of ours that is being trampled on. And so when we feel those things, that's a great opportunity to reflect on and to have some self-discovery. So resources and feelings. So reflecting on your values, let's say you've done this, you've spent some time with God and prayerfully, and you've been thinking about your experiences and your joys and other emotions you might be having and how you're spending your resources, and you think, okay, I think I've got a bit of an idea of what my values are that I'm living by. The next thing that I'd love to encourage you to do is to shape those values. And one of the great things about values is that the values that you have, I probably should not walk that far forwards or something. The values that you have today don't have to be the values that you have in a year's time. We actually have the power to shape our values. Let me share with you a quote, again from that same book that I thought really stood out to me. It said, "Many of our personal characteristics are a matter of birth. We were born with certain talents and abilities and certain deficits. But that's not true when it comes to values. No matter where or when you were born, no matter how much or how little talent or intelligence you possess, no matter the circumstances of your upbringing, you can learn, embrace, and practice good values. It's your choice." And I love this idea that our values are not just, sure, our upbringing and our environment shapes our values, but we're not powerless to our values. We actually have the ability to choose our values. And so we've talked about up to this point that our values have this incredible power to shape us, but we also have the ability to shape our values. And that's something I'd really love to encourage you to do, to spend some time thinking about and defining and choosing and thinking, are these the values that I want to be living by? And what are the ones that I want to be living by? So how do we do that? Well, one way to do this is, as I just said, to choose some values that you want to champion in your life. Now, I had spent some time in reflection this week and thinking about this, and something that I found helpful and something that has been helpful for us as a leadership team as well, we've begun some conversations, is just to get a list of values and to look through them and to think, what are the ones that I resonate with? What are the things that I really want to champion in my life? And what are the things that, you know what, I don't really make me feel joy and excitement about? And that can be a really helpful thing. Now, if you want such a list, you can just Google for them. There's lots of them, but I have one on our church website that you can find. So burwood.church/values. If you go there, or you can just go to the website, go to the bottom, and there's a little link that says personal values, and you'll find it's just simply a list of a whole bunch of different values that might be ones that you could choose to live out in your life. That approach might appeal to you, maybe it doesn't, but the thing that I'd love to encourage you to do is to spend some time thinking, what are the values that I want to champion in my life? Now, how do we know if those values are actually good values? Well, here's a couple of reflective questions that I think might help us with this. Firstly, is this: do these values reflect Jesus? I think this is a great question for us to think about. Are the values that I'm living and are the values that I'm wanting to live, are they actually values that I see being in the life and the teachings of Jesus and of the Bible as a whole? Now, in the book that I was mentioning before, one of the things that it mentions is a sort of a litmus test of whether a value is a good value. It said, good values always value people. And I thought that's a really great thing to, values that are worthwhile having are going to be, and ones that are reflecting Jesus are going to be values that are valuing other people. Here's another question that I thought might be helpful. Do these values reflect what others want me to be, or do these values reflect who God has created me to be? And I thought I'd include this because to simply say that we should have values that reflect Jesus might give us the impression that all of us might end up with the same values. If we're all wanting to reflect Jesus, does that mean that Fraser's and Eric's and Elizabeth's values are all going to be the same because they're all reflecting the same person? And I think the truth of that is no. Just because you're reflecting Jesus doesn't mean that your values are going to be the same as another person who's reflecting Jesus. And let me explain. I wanted to share with you a few characters from the Bible who I think exemplified and or champion various values. Here's one, for example, Barnabas. So Barnabas, we talked about him a while back here at Burwell Church, but he wasn't born with, his parents didn't give him the name Barnabas, but he was given that as a nickname, which means son of encouragement. And the reason he was given that nickname because he championed the value of encouragement. People were like, wow, this guy is so encouragement, we're going to nickname him son of encouragement. Here's another character, Ruth. I think she championed the value of loyalty. Let me just share this verse. If you're familiar with the story, this is kind of one of the key verses in the book. She said, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. She was a champion of loyalty. She didn't need to be loyal in this moment, but she championed that value. Paul, he was a champion of the value of zeal, of being zealous for the gospel of Jesus, and for all sorts of other reasons in his early life as well. That was something he was a champion of. Esther, she was a champion of courage. Solomon, a champion of wisdom. Dorcas, a champion of caring for the poor. Abraham, a champion of stepping out in faith. Mary, as in the sister of Martha, was a champion of connecting with God. Now, which of these characters in these values that they were living out was reflecting Jesus? All of them were. Doesn't mean that every detail of their life was a reflection of Jesus, but at least in these characteristics that they were living out and shining out, they were reflecting Jesus. And that means that all of us can be champions of different values, and all of us can be, at the same time, reflecting Jesus. I want to show you a picture. Who is this a picture of? What was that, church? Who do you see when you see this picture? Jesus? Now, it's actually an actor who played Jesus, but it's supposed to look like Jesus. This is the actor I've chosen. But this is supposed to be a picture of Jesus, but when you actually zoom in closer, you actually see a whole lot of little individual pictures of lots of different people. Zoom back out, you see this picture of Jesus. I love this as kind of this picture of what God is calling his church to be. Every one of us is championing different values, different aspects of God's character and aspects of God's love. And when you bring us all together, it makes this bigger, fuller, more glorious picture of Jesus that is reflected to the world around us. And so, reflect on your values and then shape your values. What's next? Practicing your values. It's one thing to say, I'm going to live out this in my life, and then you could print that out, you could put it in a frame, you could hang it on your wall. Wow, I'm living by great values. It's not going to mean anything unless it's something that's actually practiced in your life. And I was intentional about the word practice because values don't suddenly develop in our life overnight. They are things that grow as we focus on them, as the Holy Spirit helps us and empowers us to live them out. And as we practice them little by little, we actually grow to be people who are champions of these values. And so I want to encourage you that if you choose values, to just think of what are some little things I can do. It might be something you do each day or something you do each week or some little practice or habit that you can develop that's going to help you to practice those values so that you can grow into a champion of those values. So that's my challenge for you guys. And I invite the musicians to come up the front. But I really want to challenge you to not just be indifferent about your values, but to be intentional about them, to reflect on them, to shape them, to give them to God. This is not something that we do isolated from God, but this is something that we do in partnership with God. And choose a characteristic of Jesus and be a champion of it. And in doing so, let the glory of God shine through you and to the world around you.